Hey guys, it's Graham. What's cracking? This is part 3 of Riding with G-Dub. I was going to do a different video today, but I've read a fair amount of this Irving biography, and I'm enjoying it. I'm really getting into the rhythm of it. But man, if you got into this book thinking that it was mostly going to be a biography of George Washington, you might be as surprised as I was to find that it's like 60% just history of the main thrust of the American Revolution, like specifically the war side of it. I compare it after reading. Oh, geez, I'm like 3/4 of the way through it, and I've started comparing it to "Here Shall I Die Ashore" by Caleb H. Johnson, which purports to be a biography of Stephen Hopkins, the Mayflower passenger, but it's it takes these asides where it's a much broader picture of the initial years at Plymouth. I mean, you can have this book where 100 pages will cover 30 years, and then another 100 pages will cover 2 years. Like it slows down based on the depth and detail of the resources that the writer is drawing on. In this case, Irving was drawing on the most heavily documented parts of the Revolutionary War, which were the Lexington and Concord parts, which Washington wasn't there for, but then Washington assembling the militia, the army, and all of the mishaps and setbacks and problems of 1776. Late Friday, after I finished reading 1776, I got into the parts in this Irving book about 1777 and beyond. The main gist of this section of the book, and like I said, I'm 3/4 of the way through now. I've read a lot since the last one of these episodes. The main takeaway is persistence. There was no single event that won them the war and won independence. There was not one single battle that solved it all. The Battle of Trenton in 1776 was a turning point, and it was a significant one. It was probably the most single significant one, but that on its own didn't win them the war, as evidenced by the fact that in 1777 they were still dealing with poorly supplied men, sick men, men who got captured, but most devastating of all, men who were disillusioned. And this includes some of the 56 men who signed the Declaration of Independence and then had to kind of leave the affairs of running the country to go back to their own temporal affairs, many of whom ended up failing on that front. I would have to go back and do a follow-up video to my Who Signed the Declaration bit to track like just who went broke and how. But of those 56 men who signed it, most of them died in poverty. Some of them even went to debtor's prison. Like they really shot their shot on the American Revolution. And Washington did as well. He was fully invested. He didn't take pay to run the military. Now, granted, he was able to kind of afford that because he married into wealth when he married Martha. But still, like he didn't do it for the money. There's a gross mischaracterization that the revolution was all fought for a tax break. Taxes factored in, but it was only a small percentage of what they were after. They wanted their rights, they wanted their liberty, they didn't want to be ruled by a tyrant, they wanted to rule themselves. It wasn't just for the money. That was a peripheral benefit, and that was one of a million things that tipped the scales, kind of like the Battle of Trenton was one of a million things that ultimately contributed to the rebels' victory. The other takeaway that I had from it, it's kind of connected to this, but as events were unfolding, it reminded me of one of my assessments of Sunrise on the Reaping, which I read a couple of months ago. And that's that, these underpowered and outnumbered rebellious forces, they need to have one trait above all else, and that is persistence. I've got this saying that it bounces around in my head, and maybe it's something that somebody else coined or and I just remembered it and I use it a lot, but it still echoes in my head whenever I think about these things. I say persistence is the devil's only virtue, and if you want to beat him, you got to match it. And in those Hunger Games books, especially from Haymitch's perspective, like he got dragged into the fight, and it was 25 years before it succeeded, and that was 25 years of him, wallowing in self-pity and misery, and the District 13 and the rebellion was still going on, and like none of these things are instantaneous. They're a slow burn, and suffering is a component of it. The same thing happened with the Civil War. Like it was supposed to be over in an afternoon. It was supposed to be over in 3 months. It dragged on for 4 years. These things are never as simple as one thinks they might be on the outset, but you've got to stick it out. You've got to see it through. If any of those men who had signed the Declaration and then, say 6 months later, thrown in the towel, or if any of, well, not any of them, because some of them did, if say like all the military commanders, if they all gave up, like they together formed one of the many obstacles that George Washington had to overcome. Like with their backstabbing and political maneuvering and their self-serving tendencies, like some of them wanted Washington's command, some of them wanted his glory. They were all angling for their own things, whereas Washington had the broader vision of like, no, we got to do this to secure our liberties and to forge our new nation, or else what's any of this for? He is, once again, as I will say, the one great man. Cometh the hour, cometh the man. Like he wasn't just this dude who happened to be there to put his name to all of the things that were naturally going to happen otherwise. It wasn't invisible forces just casually unfolding like a chemical experiment. It was a man at the center of it who made the difference in the key places as needed. There's no other way of looking at it. And I think that's probably the benefit of Washington Irving being as detailed as he has been, with Washington's career in the 7 Years' War, the French and Indian War, and then now the American Revolution. The 1770s are closing out. The section of the book that I'm reading right now is talking about Benedict Arnold and his marriage to Margaret Shippen. Peggy Shippen was the nickname she went by, and we'll see his betrayal later. That'll culminate in the death of John Andre as well. I'm sure that'll all play out. That's the kind of stuff that was depicted in the Washington Spies show that I've mentioned. But it's coming together. It's been a big, long slog, and this book has largely not been what I expected. I think because I approached it with the same expectation as I might have for a Ron Chernow biography. I've read his biography of Hamilton, his biography of Grant, and his biography of John Rockefeller. And none of those books focused more than half of their text on a very narrow stretch of time in between there, whereas Washington Irving is very heavily focusing on the Revolution, to the point where there's not going to be a whole lot of time left for Washington's post-war activities, unless the file that I have is incomplete. But gosh, I hope not. I want to see what he did at the Constitutional Convention, and I want to see some write-ups of his years as president. I want to read more than just about the war. But we'll see how this all closes out. I will finish this book this week, and I'll do episode 4 next week, just so that I'm not oversaturating it. But yeah, when this is done, I'm sure I'll give myself a few years before I read the Chernow biography, and gosh, if I do ever get around to reading all 7 volumes of the Douglas Southall Freeman biography of Washington, I'm sure that will put me in a very small minority of people who have completed that. There may be a few thousand around the world total. I've still got to read his 4 volumes on Robert E. Lee, so man. But it's been good to read to get this kind of clarity on it. So you know the drill. Check the description for relevant links and such. Till next time, drive safe. See you out there.